In 1907, a Canadian court charged a 68-year-old grandfather with murder. His defense wasn't an alibi, and it wasn't self-defense. It was this: "I've done this 14 times before, and every single time, my community thanked me for it." That man was Jack Fiddler, a respected Cree shaman in what's now northwestern Ontario, and the 14 kills on his record weren't people, according to him, and according to everyone in his community. They were Wendigos. Stick with me here, because this isn't a campfire story. This is a real court case, with real witnesses, real newspapers, and a body count that historians still argue about today. And by the end of this, you're going to realize the Wendigo you think you know from horror movies, the antlered, deer skull monster from Hannibal or Antlers, has almost nothing to do with the actual legend. The real one is older, weirder, and honestly, a lot more disturbing. Let's start with the basics. The Wendigo comes from the oral tradition of Algonquian-speaking peoples across the northern United States and Canada. The Cree, Ojibwe, Innu, Naskapi, and several others. Depending on who's telling the story, it's either a giant, 15-foot-tall skeletal cannibal with glowing eyes and a belly that never stops screaming for more, or it's something scarier than a monster. A spirit that can climb inside an ordinary person and slowly, patiently turn them into that thing. Here's a detail nobody tells you. We don't actually have a single original visual description of what a Wendigo looked like. Zero. The whole legend was passed down verbally for centuries before any of it got written down or drawn, which means that whole antlers and bone-white skin look you've seen in video games and prestige TV is basically fan art. Educated guesswork, stacked on more guesswork, all the way down. What we do have is the word itself, and even that's a mess. Wendigo, 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 Wedico. Pick one, because there's no single agreed-upon spelling across the dozen or so nations who tell this story. The root is Proto-Algonquian, and here's a genuinely fun nobody fully knows moment for you. Some linguists think it comes from a word meaning ol, while others think it translates flatly to evil spirit that devours mankind. Two wildly different vibes, and after a few hundred years, nobody's settled the debate. Somewhere, a linguistics conference is still arguing about this over bad coffee. And the physical description shifts depending on which nation you ask, which honestly makes the official horror movie Wendigo even funnier in hindsight. Some traditions describe it as gaunt and starving, all ribs and yellowed fangs. Others describe something enormous, 15 feet tall, with glowing eyes, claws long enough to gut a moose, and an unnaturally long tongue, because regular-sized monster features apparently weren't going to cut it. A few versions even hand it weather control powers, which feels like overkill for something that's already 15 feet tall and permanently starving. But sure, why not go big? What everyone does agree on is the message hiding underneath the monster. Picture the world this story came from. Brutal northern winters, food running out, entire families isolated for months with zero way to call for backup. In that world, the Wendigo wasn't just a scary bedtime story. It was survival propaganda with teeth. It punished greed, selfishness, and the guy who quietly ate more than his share while everyone else went hungry. And it especially punished the one line you never cross, no matter how desperate you get: cannibalism. Which brings us to the part where this stops being folklore and starts being documented history. In 1636, a French Jesuit missionary named Paul Lejeune, who, fair warning, was not exactly a neutral, unbiased narrator of indigenous spiritual life, wrote down the first known European account of the Wendigo. He described a woman warning her community about a creature that had already eaten several people. That's the earliest paper trail we've got, and from there, the written record only gets stranger. Fast forward to the 1870s and meet Swift Runner, a Cree trapper in what's now Alberta. During a brutal winter, his entire family disappeared. When authorities finally tracked him down, he confessed he had murdered and eaten his wife, his mother, and 6 of his own children. Here's the detail that should send a chill straight down your spine. He wasn't emaciated. He wasn't starving. He looked healthy, well-fed, completely fine. And the killings didn't stop once. Food got scarce. They kept happening after spring arrived, after the game came back, after every starvation excuse had run out. Whatever drove Swift Runner, it wasn't hunger. Canadian authorities didn't have a word for what they were looking at, so they reached for the only one that fit: Wendigo. It wasn't only missionaries writing this stuff down, either. The Hudson's Bay Company. Yes, the fur trading corporation, not exactly a hotbed of superstition. kept its own records of employees and trading partners who reportedly transformed and turned to cannibalism, often explaining it away internally as mental illness or starvation while still writing the incidents down as company business. And the sightings didn't politely stay in the past. Around the town of Roseau in northern Minnesota, locals reported Wendigo encounters from the late 1800s all the way through the 1920s. Not folklore retold secondhand, but contemporary reports in a specific place, in living memory. This thing wasn't confined to bedtime stories. It was showing up in ledgers and local newspapers well into the 20th century. And Swift Runner wasn't a one-off. A researcher at the University of Alberta combed through historical records and found roughly 70 documented cases of what colonial doctors and Jesuit missionaries called Wendigo psychosis between 1840 and 1920 alone. Real people, real communities, real paperwork, not just stories passed around a fire. Somewhere between 1823 and 1897, Canadian courts handled at least 14 legal cases tied directly to Wendigo killings. 14. That's not a legend anymore. That's a court docket, which loops us right back to Jack Fiddler, because his case is the wildest one of the bunch. Fiddler wasn't some guy who accidentally stumbled into a monster story. He was a professional, literally. As a respected shaman of the Sucker clan, his job was to identify people who were transforming into Wendigos and end the process before anyone else got hurt. Over his lifetime, he claimed 14 of these interventions. Sometimes the Wendigo was a dying relative who begged to be put out of their misery before the spirit fully took hold. Sometimes it was someone showing the early warning signs: isolation, delusion, and unnatural, insatiable hunger. And the community trusted Fiddler's judgment completely. For decades, nobody in his world called this murder. They called it public health. Then, in 1907, 2 Canadian mounted police officers rode into his territory. They'd heard about a woman named Wasaka Piquet, who had died at Fiddler's hands the year before while gravely, terminally ill. Canadian law didn't have a legal category for mercy killing to prevent supernatural cannibalism. It had a category called murder, full stop. Jack Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested and charged. Jack never made it to trial. While out for a supervised walk near the jail, the 68-year-old shaman slipped away from his guard, walked into the woods, and hanged himself from a tree with his own sash. His brother Joseph stood trial alone, was convicted, and sentenced to death. A sentence that eventually got walked back on appeal, but not fast enough to matter, because he died in custody before he ever walked free. Newspapers at the time ran breathless headlines about devil worship out in the Canadian wilderness. Almost nobody stopped to ask whether an entire nation's legal and medical system, functioning for 200 years before Canada showed up, might have actually had a point. And that exact argument is still happening right now, today, in university anthropology departments. Was Wendigo psychosis a genuine, culture-specific mental health crisis? Something modern psychiatry might actually take seriously if it respected indigenous frameworks instead of dismissing them? Or was it a label European colonizers slapped onto messy, tragic human situations? Starvation, trauma, grief, isolation. Because Wendigo was a lot easier to write in a report than, "We genuinely do not understand what is happening to this person." Historians and folklorists disagree, hard, and honestly, that unresolved ambiguity might be the creepiest part of this entire story. This isn't a myth with a tidy explanation sitting at the bottom of it. It's something real enough that courts, doctors, and whole communities spent 2 centuries trying to figure out what to actually do about it. Here's where it gets even more interesting, though. The legend didn't die with Jack Fiddler. It evolved. Indigenous writers and scholars in more recent decades have reclaimed the Wendigo, not as a monster to fear in the dark, but as a metaphor. For corporations that consume without limit, for systems built on taking endlessly more than they ever give back, for a kind of civilizational greed that never, not once, feels full, which might honestly be the most accurate use of this legend in 300 years. Forget the movie monster with the antlers. The real Wendigo was never really about a creature stalking you through the snow. It was about what happens the moment enough stops meaning anything at all, which makes the Hollywood version feel almost insulting by comparison. Somewhere along the way, the Wendigo got flattened into a stock horror movie monster. Antlers bolted on for that extra creepy silhouette, a deer skull for a face, glowing eyes for the poster. It shows up that way in prestige TV, in survival horror video games, in campfire stories told by people who've never heard the name Jack Fiddler or Swift Runner in their lives. And look, A 7-foot antlered nightmare stalking you through the snow is a genuinely great horror movie premise, and nobody's arguing otherwise. But it's also a little like reducing an entire legal and medical crisis to a jump scare, which, considering what actually happened to two brothers in 1907, feels like it's missing the point by a pretty wide margin. So next time you see a Wendigo show up in a video game, antlers, glowing eyes, 7 feet of nightmare fuel, remember what actually kicked all of this off. Not a special effects team, and not a screenwriter with a deadline, but a 68-year-old grandfather who chose to walk into the woods and end his own life, rather than explain to a foreign court why his entire community trusted him completely to know exactly where hunger ends and something far darker begins. And somewhere in the deep forests of northern Ontario, if the oral tradition is anything to go by, that question still hasn't fully gone away.